Hello everyone, so the Gears of War 4 beta has officially ended, and with that I wanted to make a feedback video with some constructive criticism that I feel might be helpful for the final game. Right now you're just watching some gameplay and a lot of clips of the highlights I've had over the past 2 weeks playing the beta, mostly of heated clips, but also some funny ones too. My friends also gave me some of their clips, so that should be enjoyable to watch. In the description, I've also included a link to a Google document with a write-up of my feedback, so if you'd rather just read, go ahead and click that. Otherwise, I'm just going to run through some of the points and critiques I have of the beta while you watch the clips. So first and foremost, I want to say that the gameplay from Gears of War 4, the beta, was very, very good relative to the other Gears titles we have, and I do think that we're in line for perhaps the best Gears title yet in terms of the gameplay it delivers, and I think that's something everybody has to take a little bit of time to appreciate since it was not the final version of the product. Now, obviously, there's always room for improvement, which is why the focus of this commentary is going to be on constructive feedback, and I'm mainly going to talk about things that I think can be improved. So with that said, please assume that if I haven't talked about something from the beta, then I probably thought that it's okay to leave in. Now, another thing with feedback is obviously people are going to agree and disagree as to whether or not things should be changed. It's really hard to form a consensus over these types of things, but if you disagree with something or agree, obviously voice your opinion and state your reasons why, and I think that's the best way to really improve a game. Now let's get right into the feedback. The first thing I want to talk about is the graphics and the audio, and I think a lot of people were a bit let down by what we had seen because Gears of War 4 it's a AAA title for the Xbox One, so we were expecting something that sounds and looks much better. Now, once again, obviously it's the beta. I'm not too worried about the graphics or the audio, and I do think that 6 months is plenty of time for the Coalition to upgrade it. But just as a small note, I do think that making graphics that are more dark, gloomy, and polished will contribute to a more immersive atmosphere. And I also think enhancing the audio for things like headshots and footsteps will make the game feel more immersive as well. And that is crucial to making players feel like they're really in the game. And I think both of these components are necessary for the longevity of the game if people are really going to feel invested in it. Onto the maps. I thought the maps from the beta were actually very good, both conducive to good rifle gameplay and shotgun gameplay, depending on which areas you were fighting in. I do think that we shouldn't see maps that are larger than what we saw from the beta. The maps were already fairly big, but not too big, so hopefully we see maps of similar size and smaller. I think spawn trapping was a problem with the maps, so for the final game, I would recommend either making the spawns smaller so that for respawn game types, people can run away more easily and get out of spawn, or you can add more routes to exit spawn so that spawn trapping is not such a large issue. The new active reload system is also another thing that I think should be talked about, and I'd like to give feedback on that as well. I think that many players have always advocated that a perfect active reload should grant you with a faster reload, not a damage boost, and I'm an advocate for that as well because that would make fights more consistent, basically. But I understand that the active damage boost has also been a staple of the franchise, and it's unlikely that we're going to see it get removed. So I'd like to propose a compromise for the new active reload system that we have. So let's start with the starting weapons. When you perfectly active the starting weapons in the Gears of War 4 beta, you get an active damage boost to your entire clip, so whether that be Lancer, shotgun, or pistol, and that's very substantial because it makes the weapons extremely lethal. Now, I would say to change this, I would like to propose that when you hit a perfect active reload for the final game for a starting weapon, it should grant a damage boost to 15% of the player's starting weapon clip. So for instance, if you hit an active reload on a Lancer perfectly, 15% of that clip will have damage boost attached to it. That would be much more in line with Gears 3 because people normally didn't pre-active their whole clips, and it would give players a bit of a competitive advantage if they time their active reloads right without making their entire clip lethal. So it would still allow players to have that sort of toolbox where they can use active reloads to give them a more favorable situation in the game, but it won't be so game breaking that their whole clip is very lethal. I love the cooldown on the active reload as well, so it can't be spammed. But I think that should apply for all of the weapons together, not individually, just so you can't just keep cycling between weapons and pre-activating them. Now, giving a 15% damage boost to a clip won't work for power weapons, which is why I specified them for starting weapons only. I think with power weapons, the active reload boost should remain if the active damage boost is going to stay in place. But instead of being able to pre-active any time with those weapons, you should have to spend ammo on them instead. So let me give an example to make this more clear. When you pick up a boom shot in the beta, you can hit an active reload right when you pick it up, even if you haven't fired it off, and that makes it even more lethal. And there's actually no cooldown on it either. I think this is kind of ridiculous because it gives the player an even bigger advantage by making the weapon extra lethal when they usually have an advantage already just by picking up that power weapon. The players should have to use at least a round of their power weapon first before they're allowed to try to hit an active reload with it. The movement in the game is actually really good and near perfect, so I won't provide too much feedback for that. I do think that a small suggestion I have is to make the walking or strafing speed a little bit faster since it feels slow, similarly to Gears 2, but I could be wrong. It might be the same speed as Gears 3, in which case it's probably fine to leave it. Another small suggestion I have is for wall bouncing or wall canceling folks. You might have noticed that when you slide into cover, your screen will actually autocorrect into the center. This might be helpful for newer players, but for people who are bouncing around a lot, you're actually fighting the screen to keep your focus point separate from what the game wants you to focus on, which is the center of the screen. If you're confused by this at all, if you basically are staring in the sky and you slide into cover, the screen will autocorrect to look straight in front of you instead of remaining staring at the sky. And this just makes wall bouncing a little less smoother, and I think it might be worth while to make it an option if you want the screen to auto-center itself when you slide into cover. Not a huge deal, but definitely something worth looking into. Planted grenades is another area where I think feedback is warranted. Many players, including myself, have always advocated for the removal of planted grenades. They don't feel rewarding to get a kill with, they're very frustrating to get killed by, and they also slow down gameplay by forcing players to be careful when they're running around their map, since they have to check their corners. In the Gears livestream, they even mentioned that it was kind of a cheap way for new players to pick up a kill, but this runs contrary to the objective of making Gears of War 4 as competitive as possible. So the solution to this is simple. I think they should just remove planted grenades. Now, if this isn't an option, I would propose as a compromise that non-lethal grenades, such as smokes, can still be tagged on the walls, but lethal grenades should not be allowed to. I also really think that I like the mechanic where you can see enemy grenades through the TACCOM, so if planted grenades do remain, I think this is a feature that should stay as well. The bots is another area that I wanted to provide feedback for. I find them very frustrating. They often eat up a lot of lives in respawn game types, and they're programmed to rush and pick up power weapons. I think this is very frustrating for actual players who are fighting for those weapons and who are forced to also pick up the slack created by the bots. And I think it would just be better to remove them altogether, or at least exclude them from respawn game types and competitive playlists, so that way players don't have to worry about them. Now, onto the weapons. I think the weapon balance in this game is very good, and for the most part I would not recommend drastic changes, because when you alter one weapon, it kind of alters the worth and value of all the other weapons. So I'm just going to propose a few minor changes to some of the weapons. Starting with the Gnasher, I think that it is near perfect, but I think it should have its effective range reduced. In the beta, it would remain lethal at a considerable distance. You could L-trigger and hard aim, and it would still do a lot of damage at a range. So I don't want to see the damage of the shotgun touched up close, but I do think that at a certain distance it should stop being as effective medium to long range, so that way the weapons like the Lancer or other rifles have a better shot. Now the Hammer Burst is also another weapon worth critiquing. Relative to the Lancer, it's very weak, and it will become obsolete in my opinion if it doesn't receive either a slight damage boost, increase in accuracy, or faster rate of fire. I don't recommend adding all of those changes, and personally I don't care if it becomes obsolete, because I think the Lancer should be the sole starting weapon, and along with the Gnasher and the Snub for players, just to make things consistent. But Yeah, like I said, the hammer burst will be obsolete if it's not changed. The torque bow is also a weapon that should be changed slightly. It's excellent to use, but in the beta, if you were playing against it, it was next to impossible to hear and see. So for the final game, to make it fair for players who are reacting to the weapon, I think that its glow should be enhanced like previous games, and it should be a lot easier to hear. The bolt hawk and the snub pistol are also extremely weak, and I think a slight damage boost would make them more useful, especially in conjunction with the meat shields, which have also been weakened in this game. The bolt hawk's recoil should also be reduced to make it more effective. Right now, it's much more similar to Gears 1 than it is to Gears 3. I think personally, I enjoyed the Gears 3 bolt hawk more, and I thought it was much better. The frag grenades are also really good in this game, but I think that the toss and the detonation should also be made louder to give opposing players a fair chance to avoid them. I thought they were very difficult to hear in the beta. The last couple things that I briefly want to mention are some features that were absent from previous games that I think are worth bringing back in, namely weapon trading and ammo sharing. I think both of those were conducive to good teamwork in Gears of War 3, and they should definitely be reintroduced into the final Gears of War 4 game. And I think players should also have the option to turn off omnidirectional evade in favor of the default rolling option, just if that's what they were used to in previous games. More options like that never really hurt the gameplay, and it can help out the player a lot. Overall, though, I think this is a solid Gears of War title. I'm very optimistic for what we can expect from the final game. Please let me know what you think about my feedback, whether you agree or disagree, and share your own feedback as well. I look forward to reading your comments, and thank you for watching.